Well, greetings. Pastor Eric here from Zion Lutheran Church in Redmond, Oregon, and we are on our Sunday preview from the story. Sunday preview. Today in your reading, if you would read chapters 14 and 15, we're kind of covering, not really covering, but between today's Sunday preview, Sunday sermon, the adult forum, and there's more to the story on Monday. There's a lot of stuff that we'll be talking about from A Kingdom Divided and God's Messengers. Now, we're looking at these two chapters to see how, after Solomon's death, things go downhill pretty quickly. These are God's chosen people, and Solomon was a great king to begin with. He had everything, like we talked about last week. He had everything going for him, but his heart incrementally started going the wrong way. He grew away from God. He started doing what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and it was all taken away. Israel, the nation of Israel, had experienced unprecedented achievement and prosperity and peace during Solomon's reign. And at the end, he started oppressing his people with taxes and conscripted work. His worship of foreign gods led to a divided kingdom after his death. So there's a lot in these chapters. But the divided kingdom, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, is a main thing to remember over the next couple of weeks. The divided kingdom, northern and the southern kingdoms. Because Solomon's worship of pagan gods at the end of his life and his oppression of his people had catastrophic consequences for God's chosen people. When Solomon died, his son Rehoboam refused to provide any relief from Solomon's heavy taxation, so there all of a sudden started to be a divided nation. Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, and Judah, two small tribes, remained loyal to Rehoboam, and the other 10 tribes seceded to the north and took the name of Israel, and they took Jeroboam as their king. However, Jeroboam also set up idols of, pagan counterfeit worship, leading the whole 10 northern tribes into idolatry. And prophets, there were northern kingdom prophets that we'll talk about on Monday and the next week, northern kingdom prophets. They predicted the end of Jeroboam's reign, which soon occurred afterwards. So in Judah, Rehoboam, there's the Boam brothers, okay? You got Rehoboam in the south and Jeroboam in the north. Rehoboam in the south also let his people fall into idolatrous worship. The peace of Solomon had during his reign of prosperity and at the beginning of integrity ended when the king of Egypt, Shishak, attacked Judah and carried off their gold and silver treasures. So Rehoboam replaced them with bronze, but the decline in moral and spiritual values was even sharper than their change from gold to bronze. That's kind of a symbolic, as quite a step down. But it wasn't just in their temple relics, but it was also in their hearts. So there were a series of idolatrous kings in the north and in the south during this time. They're really in the north, in the northern kingdom. There were really no good kings after the split to the northern kingdom. And they had Ahab and Jezebel. We'll talk about them coming up when we talk about Ezekiel next week. Ahab and Jezebel, terrible people, king and queen Queen Jezebel of the north. So God didn't just sit idly by. God kept calling prophets on his behalf and said, there's no God but Yahweh. There is one God. And we'll talk next week about King Ahab and Jezebel and their 850 pagan prophets, and Elijah, who had this duel with them. And it's a whole, not complicated story, because what we're doing in the story here is kind of hitting the highlights so you know the main storyline. We'll talk about Elijah and wicked King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. We'll talk about them next week. So, God sends Moses, Hosea, a lot of these different people to come back to God, but they didn't. So there are, remember, discussion questions at the end of each chapter that is on, or not at the end of each chapter, at the end of the book on page 473 in the story, that kind of help you think about some of these things. But we look at these stories in chapters 14 and 15, and they're full of conflict. It needs to be resolved, but it doesn't seem any way to do that. But in the midst of the messy lower story, God's upper story is one in which God relentlessly goes after his people to get them back, to call them back to God. That is the kind of the essence of these couple of chapters, calling them back to God. I think in our culture today, there is so much stuff that's messed up, but God keeps calling us back. And that's why I'm so glad you're watching these videos, watching or coming to church here on Sunday, checking in on the more to the story on Monday, because God keeps calling us back. So keep your heart open to what God wants to do in your life. And amidst all of the mess in our world, God will come through for you. So enjoy your reading and the sermon on Sunday, either at church or online. Listen on Monday, and you'll get more to the story. So until I see you again, you take care. Bye-bye.